Mercy is for the weak. Enemy deserve no mercy.
Time to light it up.
We are continuing our Franchise Fridays, and this franchise we are doing is one that I really was looking forward to doing, and that's The Karate Kid.
The combat is real. Karate Kid Part 2.
So, and I had very little or no memory of watching this movie, because I haven't seen this film in probably over 20-something years. And the first one, obviously, I remembered almost the entire thing. But when you get from 2 to 3 to 4, I have little or no memory. I don't even think I've seen Part 3, to tell you the truth. And 4, I may have seen part of it.
Well, I've seen all 4 of these films. I've seen them over and over, again and again and again, because I do watch television. And they play them on television. They have them on YouTube. They have them everywhere. I mean, Karate Kid is pretty much everywhere. This movie in particular, I remember when it was coming out that, man, I could not wait to see this, because like I said in the first review of Karate Kid, part of what Daniel was going through I related to in that film. So here, you know, when this was coming out, I was like, oh man, I am there. I can't wait to see this movie come out. And I remember one of the big things about this movie too was I remember the soundtrack to this film as well. What the big song from the movie was "The Glory of Love" by Peter Cetera. And I remember hearing that song before I ever went and saw the movie, and I was like, man, that's a great song. I love the song. And it luckily didn't spoil anything for the movie. But you couldn't help hearing it, because I remember it was everywhere. I mean, it was like that song was everywhere, playing everywhere. And it was the biggest hit of that year. It was one of the big hits and big soundtracks of that year was The Karate Kid Part 2. And that's when soundtracks were still really big in the 80s. So I was in for this movie as soon as I heard they were making Part 2.
So what you're saying is back in the 80s, they still cared about the music in the films.
Exactly. Well, they cared about the songs. I mean, they cared about the soundtracks. Nowadays, you barely hear a soundtrack to any movie. You hardly ever hear a song from any movie. It happens, but it doesn't happen like it did in the 80s.
Yeah, until they started playing that song again in this film, I was like, that's where this song came from, was this movie? I had no idea. I was like, oh, are they just playing it, or is it from the movie? I was like, oh, well, I guess it must be from the movie.
And I'll give you another little tidbit, or another little nugget of information here that's probably useless. The soundtrack to this, I remember when it was coming out, it was right at the point where cassettes and albums, record albums, were kind of starting to go out because CDs were coming in. And I believe they made a CD to this. I believe it's on CD somewhere. And if anyone out there has one, you're in luck, because they came out with it and then it went out of print. And it's been out of print for years, and trying to get that soundtrack on CD or on tape or on record album is really, you can either find it in a garage sale or you'll find it on eBay, and on eBay it'll be like gazillions of dollars. You know, they try to charge you whatever to try to get just that soundtrack. I mean, it's like one of the rare out of print soundtracks that's really hard to find.
So watching this, I just watched this last night, actually. No idea. I had no idea what this movie was about. I couldn't remember it. I was like, well, what did they do in the second one? No clue. But what they did in this movie was so smart, was they made this movie about Mr. Miyagi, not so much about Daniel. This was Mr. Miyagi's story. The first one was Daniel's story. This was Mr. Miyagi's story. and they ended up going out of state, going to Mr. Miyagi's hometown, which was where? I can't. Was it?
Okay, they didn't go out of state, Dave. They went out of country.
I'm trying to remember, where was it?
They went over to Okinawa, Japan.
China here, Japan here, Okinawa here.
State, country, whatever. They went somewhere. I remember that.
They didn't cross the river, Dave.
Yeah, they crossed the river, so they went out of state.
They crossed the Pacific, Dave.
And that's the other thing I thought was kind of funny, was he gets on a plane, he jumps on a plane, and he's like, hope you don't get airsick. He's like, what does that mean, get airsick? Not realizing he's going to be on a freaking plane for 12 hours, or however long, it took to get there back then.
It's like 16 or 18 hours or something.
And that's a really smart thing that they did with this movie. Rather than trying to do another remake of the first film, which it kind of did in this a little bit, but for the most part, change scenes. Go to Okinawa, show Mr. Miyagi's part of his life that we didn't get to see it in the first film. And it was just really, I actually really enjoyed this movie more than I thought I was going to. I didn't really think I was going to like it that much for some reason, because I didn't remember it. So I figured, well, if I don't remember it, it'd probably get that good. But actually it is. It is really good. It's really well told. It doesn't have the action, I guess, or the suspense the first movie did, because you never knew what was going to happen in the first film. This, I think, turned more into a drama than it did more of an action adventure type of thing like the first one.
Well, one of the things I remember about seeing this movie is I remember when it, like I said, when it came out, I was like, oh, man, I got to go see it. And because of that, I was actually the only one that went and saw it out of my family. And I remember sitting in the theater that I went to was here in Florida, and it was a little 2-screen theater. And it wasn't even on the big screen. It was on the smaller screen. And I remember sitting there watching it and going, oh my God, this is so great. This is a decent, spectacular sequel. It made so much sense. And it clicked. And it was everything that Karate Kid 1 was, and even better. I loved this movie. From the moment it started to the moment it ends, I absolutely love this film.
Yeah, I think it was really good. And again, it showed off the acting ability of Pat Morita for the film. He did a really, really great job in this. And again, you have the younger generation learning from the older generation in this film. And then, of course, even over in Okinawa, you got the bullies. And I think the bully in this movie was worse than the other one. He was pretty horrible guy. He actually wanted to kill Daniel in this movie. He didn't want to hurt him. He just actually wanted to kill him.
Come on!
No, we fight to death.
And that's the thing that turns and makes this story even more fantastic, is because now it's not for a tournament. It's not to win the prize. It's the actual, when they actually come together and fight, it's for life. It's for survival. One of them could die. There's a good chance that could happen.
Daniel-san, it's not tournament. It's for real.
And the few things I remember from the film was the song, obviously. I remember the song, and of course the drum. I was like, oh, I remember that. And that was the only two things I remember watching from this. It was like watching a completely new movie for me. And I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it a lot. I thought they did such a good job. Especially, it wasn't the sequel maybe that people were expecting. I think they expected to see Daniel back in another tournament and, fighting for something else, or have another bully. And again, they did that, but they did it in a different way. And it was good. It was really good what they did.
And I loved how this movie opened up, because it actually opened up with something they filmed for Karate Kid 1, where they actually showed what happened after the tournament. And I loved that scene. And that scene is actually a really important scene that happens, that moves on not only throughout this film but into the next two films, and then eventually throughout the entire Karate Kid theme. I mean, it was really important that they showed that in this movie, was the way that it starts out and starts showing what happened at the end of Karate Kid.
I thought it was kind of dumb with the way they got rid of Elizabeth Shue.
Yeah.
Wrecks a car, runs off with a football player, and that's all you hear from her. But then again, if that didn't happen, then he couldn't go to Okinawa and find another woman and have another love life going on over there. None of that could happen, because if he did, then he'd be just cheating on the woman over here. And I guess they didn't want that to happen, so they had to come up with some kind of excuse of what happened, and it was pretty dumb. I didn't like that too much.
Yeah, I agree. That was probably the one thing in the story that I wasn't crazy about. I didn't like how they just kind of wrote her out of it like that. Especially after the whole point, one of the big points about the first film was he was trying to get the girl, you know. So he makes this big thing to try to get the girl to like him throughout the entire first film, and then she, you know, at the end they're together, everybody's together, everybody's happy. There's, you know, he won the tournament and all of this, and then they just write her off as she met somebody else and wrecked his car.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, they could have come up with something. Maybe she moved out of town, or she was going to go to college somewhere, and they were going to break up. They could have had a scene with her. I don't know why she wasn't in the movie, but they could have done it a little bit better. But overall, it's a really, really solid movie. Is it as good as the first one? I would say no. I think I like the first one better than this one. Not to say this was a bad film. It's a really good movie with a lot of emotion in it and a lot of fantastic acting from everybody in this film. So for me, this movie gets a 5 out of 5.
What I have to say about this film is I absolutely loved it from beginning to end. I loved it from beginning to end. I loved the entire film. I thought the acting was great. I thought the story was great, except for the whole girlfriend part of it, with him losing his girl from the first film. But I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was every bit as good as the first film, and I enjoyed it every bit as much as the first film. And I would actually have to give this movie the bomb.
You are lower than the song!
Live or die, man. Die. Wrong.